What is the experience like for a client, somebody who has been experiencing homelessness and has made contact with the homeless response system, and is moving into a unit that they've received through a master leasing arrangement? Like, what's their experience like? How does it work for the client?
The people that we were working with were generally pretty excited. We told them that we had units. So we would go into encampments. We would tell folks that we had units for them to take a look at. And if they liked the unit, that they potentially could be able to move into that unit same day. And so we had vans going to several of the different units that we had available. They were typically located within the areas of the encampments, so people could stay within the community that they were connected to. We brought folks to those units. They would see the units. And I think the thing that I really love to be able to talk about relative to the units that we brought on in Los Angeles were just how beautiful those units were. And they were centrally located to lots of different things with, employment opportunities, bus transportation, all of those things that made it easier for people to be able to get around. So the experience that I saw was sheer excitement. I also saw some people being a little like, are you sure this is for real? Because they've, many people are or have been on our waiting list for a long time, meaning that they have been matched or have been connected to a resource. And we're in process of taking them around to look at units, which could be a slow, tedious process as well, because it takes time to call each landlord one at a time, set up unit viewings, and then finding the client and making sure that we can get the client there during the same time that the property owners can be there to show the units. In this case, we were taking people to units that were truly available. And if they said yes, we were able to connect them to those units, in some cases the same day. And they were beautifully furnished. One of the other the benefits, we were able to bring on shared housing units. And why is that important? Because we were moving people into units that they would be able to afford if they weren't connected to a voucher at the end of the rapid rehousing assistance. They were affordable by LA standards, somewhere in the neighborhood of between $1,100 and $1,300 a month. And everybody had their own their own room. They had their own bathroom. They had their own refrigerator. They had their own microwave. And so they only had to share things like the stove or the oven or some of the other common space living. So not only were we able to bring people in, but we were able to scale shared housing, which was really, really difficult to do in Los Angeles, asking each landlord one at a time to do things like split leases.
You mentioned that it is beneficial to be able to place clients in different communities where they want to live, where they have access to employment and transportation and the things that you need to live your life. How does master leasing help with that?
So how master leasing helps in terms of giving people greater access to different communities is because we have the ability to go in and negotiate at a different level. Property owners really care about a couple of things. One, that they are paid and that they are paid on time. Two, that there are not significant issues with the tenants that create problems for the community as a whole, whether that be a building or the neighborhood. Also, they care about turnover. The least amount of turnover means the more guarantees they have of stability within their portfolio. And so when we're talking about master leasing in general, we can start to go in and negotiate around those components with property owners and say, you're guaranteed rent for 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, whatever the case may be, in a way that they wouldn't have those same guarantees. And so because of those guarantees, we've been able to engage new property management firms, new owners in different neighborhoods to say, hey, we want to work with you and we can give you some of these guarantees that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. And we've been able to negotiate the rents down from where they were so that they're not these high exorbitant rates because of those longer term guarantees.
What are some of the different forms that master leasing can take? Like, can it be done at different levels of a system? Is it always renting an entire building? Like, what are the different forms it can take?
There's no real limitation. You can go in and engage a property owner and say, hey, we'd like to get your entire building. We can go into a neighborhood and say, we'd like to rent your entire house. We can go into various different property management firms that have a portfolio of units all over the place, which really starts to open up opportunities for our clients to live in all kinds of different neighborhoods and not concentrated in some of the typical neighborhoods that many of our communities have access to right now.
So if an organization or a community wants to get started with master leasing, what are their first steps?
I think some of the first steps are sitting down and taking a look at the risks, and working with their local community to try to determine where some of those risks can be mitigated, whether it be that there's longer term funding arrangements or maybe some shared responsibility in terms of the risks that are associated. But understanding the risks are going to be the first place any organization is going to want to start, because there are some. There's a lot of benefits, but people need to decide for themselves, or organizations need to decide for themselves their appetite for taking on some of those risks. I would also engage with their localities to determine, are some of those localities willing to take on the entirety of the risk. Some of the things that I talked about with the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles are the cost of doing nothing is not nothing. The cost of cleanups are extensive. The cost of master leasing motels is expensive. Master leasing is cheaper than those activities. And you're getting people permanently housed. And so if you don't want to see some of the growth of encampments and things on your community streets, then this is something that they should engage, a conversation that they should engage in. And then I think the next step is partnering with, your local apartment association and or realtor boards and or just your landlord community, your property owner community, to see where there's interest. In Los Angeles, we were not lacking interest. Once it was known that we were engaging in these conversations with property owners, we had a lot of property owners showing up to our LASA commission meeting saying we would like to have our units be part of the portfolio. So I think those are some of the starting points. And then I think lining up funding to be able to ensure that that the rents can be paid, and that there's damage mitigation funds set aside for potential damages, because damages will occur. I won't say that they're significant, but damages can occur. I would say look into the different types of insurances. So in most cases, I would always recommend that you do not do triple net, because the owners are still getting paid. And so, and now we're getting into the technicalities, but I think what would be the right structure of the lease, I think, would be the next step. Is it a triple net? Is it going to be where the property owner keeps on some of their own liabilities and the agencies are just taking on extra liability insurance? So I think understanding the insurances are really important as well.
Can you explain triple net?
Yeah, triple net would be where whoever goes into the property and leases the property not only pays for the rent, not only pays for the ongoing maintenance of the unit and or the building, but also takes on all of the property taxes and all of the property insurances. And I would strongly advise against that.
That makes sense to me.
I do strongly recommend that communities start taking a look at centralizing property, landlord engagement activities. I think that that's incredibly smart, because it starts to drive down the competition. That's the other benefit to master leasing, is that when we control the units, then we're controlling some of the price points because of our negotiation on the front end. And so a lot of the property managers that used to, they would call all of the different agencies one at a time to compete for better pricing. We were able to mitigate that. But in Los Angeles as a whole, we thought that needs to be done at a system level anyway, so that we stopped doing that. And so in LA, we were able to bring on centralized housing location and centralized rent payments. So all of our rents are going through party entity anyway. So the providers are no longer having to pay those rents. There was some feeling from some providers initially around, would it work, would it not work? And what I would say is many of the agencies in my community have said, they don't have to borrow money anymore while they're waiting to be reimbursed, because they're not the ones that are paying the rent. And in some cases, particularly in larger communities, some of the agencies were holding $1 million a month in what they were paying out in rent and waiting to be reimbursed. So anyway, plug for that really smart idea around centralized housing location and centralized rent payments.
Absolutely. And we've got a couple of other videos featuring speakers from communities who've done just that, which I'll link in the description on this one.
The last thing, and I say this all the time, master leasing is not a program, or it shouldn't be. It should just be what it is, a unit acquisition strategy to bring on more units in your community using the existing programs that you already have, your rapid rehousing dollars, your permanent supportive housing dollars, and in some cases your transitional housing dollars. Not necessarily finding new money, just using the money that you have more smartly to ensure that none of those dollars get returned because you weren't able to find a unit that said yes to a particular client, and that client has been walking around with a Section 8 voucher for a really long time, or with a rapid rehousing resource for a really long time, trying to identify a unit that would meet their needs. This gives you the ability to garner those units, to control those units, so that as people are being matched, there are opportunities for them to go into immediately, that we know that they will immediately get to a yes, and that we can ensure that those people are not only housed, but the resources that we have are fully being utilized.
And for anybody who's not familiar, the programs that Kris just mentioned, like rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing, both involve tailored supports to help that new tenant stabilize in their housing, right, based on whatever they might need, with the goal of long-term thriving and long-term stability. And it sounds like that can be a whole lot easier to do if you are not running around looking for new landlords all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. If people are interested, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to engage in any conversation directly around that and get people connected to the resources that they need in order to make the best decision for themselves.
And we'll put a link to the impact group in our description.
That's great.
Kris, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this. I really appreciate your time.
Sure. No problem.